Emily, despite the rumors, you're still on the Deconstruction Zone.
I'm still on the Deconstruction Zone. I feel like, it was only 2 weeks, right, that I wasn't on it?
4 weeks of episodes.
That I wasn't on it?
Yeah.
Oh, that is a lot. Okay, I get it. Why people said that.
Yeah, it's been a while. So longer
back.
in record. No, maybe less. Maybe that's why it's been less in
That's
record.
probably why I didn't think about it. But yeah, I am back. There was a lot going on, but we're here.
We also hung out one time in between where we thought we were going to record and then didn't record. So we've seen each other more frequently.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Well, what's for the listeners who maybe thought that you had been kicked off the pod?
My own grandmother called me and she was like, Emily, are you still doing the podcast? And I'm like, yeah, I am. And she was like, okay, good. So
well, what have you been up to since the pod has seen you last?
Since the pod has seen me last, had I already started school?
It was like it was either that week or it just started.
Yeah. So that's been happening. It's pretty fun. I just love my students. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. Do you remember me talking about hating Pepsi on this podcast?
No.
So I got a DM from someone. Apparently that was like the hottest take ever. Which when we get to or email corner, I do actually want to dive into this person's thing. I
love that.
But
I think you said we were talking about Coke Zero, and then you were like Pepsi Zero, like drinking puke or something. Yeah. And I was like, bro. Yeah.
So I just wanted to start this off. I was interested. Like if you were ranking like Pepsi Max, Coke Zero, Diet Coke, where would you what is your hierarchy? Your Mount Rushmore of colas.
Of colas. I was actually driving the other day and I was like, what if I became an RC cola girl? I feel like that could work with my brand, but that's beside the point.
Do they still sell Royal Cola?
Oh, is that what it stands for?
Yeah. Is that what you said? Oh, when you said RC, I said the name in my mind.
Well, I said RC Cola, so I said Royal Cola.
There you go.
I messed it up. Okay. Love Coke Zero. Coke Zero.
The best.
I would probably I'm a big zero soda gal. I feel like it's not too heavy.
Yeah.
It's just the right vibe for me. So I am gonna go Coke Zero, Pepsi Zero.
Pepsi Max? Is that what it's called?
A long time ago it was called that.
Okay, I don't know.
I mean, you don't keep up with the Pepsi world, clearly.
I think Pepsi sucks.
Okay.
So.
Coke Zero, Pepsi Zero. I would probably say, okay, this is gonna shock you, I think. And then I'm gonna go Coke, Diet Pepsi, Pepsi, Diet Coke.
Okay.
What about you?
Coke Zero, regular Coke, Pepsi, and then all the diets. I think just general
Pepsi
diet.
Zero you don't like?
It's probably in there somewhere, maybe. But I think if it's a diet in the name, it tastes more like metallic-y. I'm not into it. There's something about the taste of it. I'm not into it.
Although, honestly, I can roll with Diet Pepsi. I had one of my Bible teachers in high school was like, we were talking about Lent, and he was like, don't give up something that's not that hard to give up. Like, give up something that's you really need to give up. And he was like, for me, that would be Diet Pepsi. And then he goes, and just moved on. And I was like, I love your commitment to Diet Pepsi.
Yeah.
And he definitely did not give it up.
I think part of it might be, and this is because I did a blind taste test one time, and I ranked all the Pepsis the highest, which is really funny.
Ooh.
But I still say that I don't like them. Some of it, I think, is the design of the can. Like the Coke Zero can is the best, and the bottle. I feel the most.
The red with black lettering.
Yeah, I just love it when I have the can or the bottle, and the other ones I'm like, I don't need this brand in my life.
I do like the all black of the Pepsi Zero though. It's very classy,
sleek.
Anyway,
what are we talking about today?
But anyway, I started school. I have a quick anecdote from school that goes perfectly with the pod. Is I did this little get to know you sheet, know, get to know myself. Well, actually, it was get to know them, so they can write answers.
Right. But
there was also a point that was do you have any questions for Ms. L? And one of them was just, do you believe in Christianity? And I was like, all right, you don't even know. I should have just written the link to the pod.
I got a podcast for you.
No, but it was pretty interesting because I was totally that kid who would write that. The year I went to public school, that's what I wrote to all my teachers. So I was like, I get this kid.
Yeah. And
so I kind of just wrote I was raised Christian. I go to church. I think Jesus is dope. I didn't really say dope, but and then I was like, but I also think there's a lot of value and a lot to learn from other religions too.
Are you allowed, so say someone asks you that, you're allowed to say your convictions if they ask you. You just can't share them without being prompted.
Correct. Okay. I can't just be like, hey, everybody, I'm a Christian and you should be a Christian. A lot of it is the like proselytizing
Yeah.
thing.
Did you see Missouri passed a law where public schools can teach Old New Testament now? Like as
No.
electives in public schools, I think.
Catch me doing that as an elective next year. Old Testament.
Bible is lit.
Bible is lit. Bible is lit.
And yes, that'd be a great class. But here's the deal. I'm a Barbie girl. And I'm in a Barbie world. And we're going to talk about Barbie today.
We are going to talk about Barbie. It's funny thinking back on it because when we were going to record, you saw it at like 10 p.m. the night before we were going to record, right?
I did. I crammed it in as soon as possible, and then we weren't able to record. But I do remember seeing it very late.
Yeah. Did you stay awake the whole time?
Oh, yeah. I don't fall asleep in movies.
That's good.
Annie, though, my wife, stayed awake.
Wait. You have a wife named Annie?
I
We
do.
never talk about her.
Also, quick Annie update, actually, now that I remember this. Do you remember when I talked about her making root beer? Was that with a Dustin episode or an Us episode? Anyway, turns out she never made root beer. She's like, I don't know whose story. So someone told me about them making root beer, and they made it, but apparently not my wife. So
thank you for the corrections.
yeah, she was like, she said she started laughing and then wherever she was, which probably now she's gonna be like, I didn't say that either. And now I'm just spinning a web
The
of
lies. My boyfriend and I are going to my Nana's log cabin on Saturday, and we're going to make butter.
Ooh,
Isn't that kind of fun? We're going to churn
the
it.
tables have churned.
Stop. Okay, Barbie. So, what was your original take? You can be honest.
I have lots of takes. So I really we haven't talked about this at all.
Yeah,
right?
we talked about it on the...
I like it. I thought it was a good movie. I didn't think it was like the world's most ground shaking movie that I ever saw. Like,
yeah.
I know there are people that walked out of it and they're like, this movie radically changed my life in every single way. And it's the greatest piece of cinema ever made. I would not agree with either of those. Also, there was someone that I remember walking out of the theater and saying, this movie wasn't made for me. And I think in some ways I resonated with, like, it wasn't directly speaking to my experience as a person.
As a man?
As a man.
Okay.
But I also, like, thought the Ken story does, like, get into that kind of stuff, right? And all the male characters and different levels of masculinity and stuff I thought was interesting and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I liked the movie. I thought it was, I would give it as a scale, like a 8.7 out of 10.
Okay, that's a nice score.
Yeah.
I've seen it twice at this point.
Yeah.
The first time I saw it, my boyfriend and I went and saw it, and we were in Orange Beach, Alabama at the time, and we went after a day at the beach, which like sounds luxurious, but we were just, the sun still like takes it out. It just makes you tired in a weird way. So we barely, like, we both, this is really sad. We both were like entertained, but halfway through, both of us looked on our phones at the running time, which just means that neither of you are like really in it.
Yeah. That's funny.
So we were like, we didn't love it, but maybe we didn't have the best experience or we didn't go at the right time. But then I saw it again a few weeks later and was like much more prepared for it and really did enjoy it. And I felt like, I think Greta Gerwig's awesome. And I think the movie knew what it was. And I think that's kind of a hard thing to navigate because it was like, we're making fun of Mattel, but we're also like sponsored by Mattel. And
yeah, that was my favorite part, actually, was how self-aware they were about it and making fun of themselves while also being like a Mattel-made movie. Also, if we're being honest, like, it's a money, like, they know they're going to make money by making fun of themselves. But I did think that they were like generally self-aware in a way that I was like, I appreciated that about the movie.
Yes. And so, but I will say what I kind of want to dive into is I saw, I'm not going to be able to find it really quickly, but I saw something online that said the Barbie movie creates this alternate Garden of Eden story where instead of woman made for man, man is made for woman, and like the way that changes society. And I found that fascinating because I remember, so right away, as soon as Ken came on the screen, that's who I related to. And I think that's kind of the point, is that Ken, at least at the beginning, is representing maybe what a typical person would say, like, a woman's place in society is.
Sure.
And so, like, even at the beginning when it said, like, Ken exists, I don't really think there's going to be, like, spoilers, but there might be.
Spoiler
be prepared.
alert.
Okay. It says, like, Ken is only happy if Barbie looks at him, and he just, like, waits all day for that. And I was like, oh, I think there's I think there's truth in my life and a lot of women I know, temptation to just be like, it can be very like male centered, like, okay, well, am I getting male
Yeah.
attention and like all that? And all that to say, then at the end, so totally a spoiler, at the end, um, Ken goes to Barbie and he goes, I'm like, it's not Barbie and then there's Ken. It's like Barbie and Ken. He was like, and I'm and Ken. Like, I was made for you
Mm-hmm.
to be your like kind of like buddy.
Yeah.
And he was like, so my whole identity is in being your like person.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I was like, that is how I felt like the Garden of Eden story was told to me. And I think I didn't even realize how many implications that had for me as how I thought of myself as a woman and as a person and like where my worth is until seeing the roles reversed and him saying like, I'm not my own person. Like I'm made to like fill your like, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, so the Hebrew word in the Genesis story is Ezer, like, which means helper. And so this idea like there was man, right? The Ezer was created, the helper was like this idea to be the supplement and in some ways well, actually, I don't think this, but it's been viewed as like the completion to the whole, like the helping this person realize their full potential. And so I think it's interesting. Like I wouldn't have thought about it that way, like in this Garden of Eden metaphor, but I can see that. But I do think to what you're pointing to, it's like the way, and maybe you weren't exactly pointing to this, but like the way we're taught about the importance and the narrative of the creation story does radically impact how we as men view our place in the world, as how women view their place in the world, how we view relationships. Like if you're a man, how you probably view your spouse implicitly. Like that's funny because like you watching it, it's like you didn't come in being like, this is a connection to that story, right? The garden story.
Yeah.
But you just naturally found your place in it with the person, like with the guy character. But it was just like their role within it. Like I get that. And so I think that's interesting, but also points to like, I think a problematic nature of how we probably tell the creation story, right? And how we live out roles and places. And like if a man or like if we're all Kens, like that's like we have individualistic parts of us and we have stories and we are characters in our story. So if our role is only to help someone else complete their story, I think that's probably problematic.
Yeah.
Also, if we're the main character and everyone is just helping to support us, that's also a problem, right?
So you said you think sometimes that would, how the church tells the creation story would also affect like men and how they see themselves and their spouses. Like, do you think that's true? Do you think men like see their spouse as almost like more of an accessory?
Well, if you're if you're listening to a lot of Mark Driscoll and you're the spiritual head of the household, right? Like, what is your wife other than the person that's supposed to nod and say yes to you to help you, like, keep the house clean so that you can have a clear mind to lead? Like, evangelical Christianity doesn't hide their views on gender roles. And so it's like, I think if you grew up in an evangelical type church that's similar to a Mark Driscoll style church, and I only say him because he dominates my feed with masculinity posts on TikTok. And it's like, that's what they're purporting to be, the way we have been designed to be, is like men dominate, have dominion and lead, and their spouses, who are only allowed to be women, are the ones that are supposed to support them in all they do. And like, it's very much like your function and role is only to support the man's pursuit of their like purpose in life. So I know it's really like, he just made a post today about how dads should break up with their daughter's boyfriends if they're bad. Like, so it's like even the dad, like the daughter doesn't have like,
wait, the dad should do the breaking up?
Like if it's like, yeah, essentially it's like the daughter doesn't even have their own agency for their boyfriend, right? Like, and he's very much of like, the man is in control of their wife and in control of their daughter until the daughter is then in control of their husband that isn't in control of them. So it's like women are just accessories to be passed around. And so to even going back to the Barbie thing, like I could see how you could see Ken, because that's what Ken in the story is, an accessory that's coming to terms with the fact that he feels autonomous or wants to be. And I think the movie, I've never seen a movie use the word patriarchy so much, but also do it in a funny way. But like, as he discovers like, oh, I might have some agency, you see what happens, and he takes it to the complete worst degree. But he's like, I want to be a player in the story. I just don't want to be the accessory, right?
And at the end, that's not even what he want. Like, he
No.
realized he was like,
Yeah.
I didn't even have that much fun. Like, it was just about the horses for me. Like, like, which is so funny.
Yeah.
But that wasn't even like the solution. The solution is he just wanted to be considered like a full person or doll, just like Barbie.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like Mark Driscoll is a great point, because I remember in The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, there's this part where he's mad at his secretary or something, and he's like, I only speak to heads of households.
Yeah.
And so her husband had to come in, and he talked to her husband, and she's sitting right there.
Yeah.
And
as a person that was a part of the team, like she worked, like, you know what I
Right.
mean? Like, but still couldn't communicate directly with her because she was a woman.
because and there's like so many reasons why. But I think we see in the Barbie movie, like, the women also having those blind spots a little bit of like the whole Supreme Court is women, and like things, and they're probably just kind of talking to each other and getting things done. They're probably not saying like, I only speak to Barbies and not Kens, but we do have a way to like see whoever's in power, even if it's accidental, like we'll see people as kind of accessories. And that's a really hard feeling as a woman, even because I feel like my whole life, I mean, I've shared on this, like, I think in the church, they very much say like, women, like, you have to get married. And if you're not married, something's wrong with you. And so like, that's something that's kind of always been in my psyche, I feel like. But watching that, I was like, oh, of course, because was our literal job, was to be, we were taken out of man, and then you just like have to find the person that you complete and help. And it's like, if that's your whole life, that then when someone's like, who are you actually? And she's like, who's Ken? And he's like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm just Ken,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the creation story, it doesn't explicitly say this, or people wouldn't explicitly teach this, but it's like men are created in God's image and women are created in like as an afterthought out of man's image, right? Or just like a kind of a secondary thing that's just supposed to, like, I sometimes wonder, and you would answer, like, you grew up in this world, but like how much women feel in that kind of environment, like they're actually created in the image of God versus, or if maybe you do, and don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe you do, but like, I guess that image looks different just based on your gender. I don't know. I could see why it's both oppressive and confusing to navigate and live life within, but also once you get outside of it, like to go watch a movie when you're like out of that world, but you still can see things and get pulled back into it.
Yeah.
Because it was so ingrained in who you were.
Well, absolutely. I think when we talk about God with male language all the time, as a woman, or as someone with a different gender, like, you do feel less in the image of God, whatever that is, whatever image they talk about. And you do, like, I've said that before. I was like, I feel like I'm less in the image of God. And even when they said, like, like, Jesus came down to fully understand humanity. I remember telling a friend, I was like, I don't think that Jesus fully understands my humanity, because like, he's never had a period. Like, I don't think we've talked about that before, but it's just things like that of, there are very specific female experiences that, to say like male God and male Jesus fully understand you, it's hard to like believe that or to feel comforted by that.
Yeah.
But also with the creation story, I was thinking about the idea. I was thinking a lot about the Garden of Eden story as it pertains to the Barbie movie. And then I was thinking about, like, the classic homophobic phrase, like, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve.
Heard it a time or two.
Just a time or two.
Yeah.
But that brought me to the character of Alan in the story.
Yeah, love Alan.
Love Alan. So I'm going to be honest, the first time I watched it, I was like, why is this character in this movie? Like, it just kind of didn't make sense to me. Again, I was very tired.
Yeah.
But before I saw it a second time, one of my friends who's gay, he was like, they captured in a lot of ways the LGBTQ experience through the character of Alan in the movie. And that's something that I wouldn't have, like, I don't think it would have been on my radar, but as I watched it, it was so interesting because it constantly was like, how do I explain it? It was very much like a men and women movie, right? Like that, like they talked about patriarchy and what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a man. And there's this whole time every time they say things like, well, Barbies and Kens like can be equal or they can work together. And then all of a sudden, like Alan, half his lines just feel like it's like, and Alan,
Yeah.
you know, which is really sad. But I think also really important because I was processing, even as the Barbie movie, like, made me as a woman, and I know several women, they felt very much like seen by the movie, or it named some of their experience that maybe they hadn't seen named before, is I was like, oh, there is still so often, like, when we talk about the issues with men and women in the church and out of the church, we often forget to talk about the LGBTQ community, like, as a whole.
Yeah.
And Alan is just consistently going like, and Alan.
Yeah. Yeah. I think didn't think about it in terms of
Yeah.
that necessarily characterized, but I did immediately connect, like, this is a group of people, men that are like not traditionally masculine, maybe is kind of where I saw it.
Okay,
like people
yeah.
that are more like, and not even like play sports, like I don't mean like that,
Right.
but that are like not that interested in like fulfilling like super stereotypical gender stereotypes of what masculinity or femininity means. But I did love his character because he's always, like you said, kind of like just chiming in with not only like wise tidbits, but also like, don't forget about me. And I think like in some way, I went in, I thought Alan was the bad guy. I don't know why I thought that.
Oh.
Like I just assumed he was like kind of like trying to spoil everyone's thing.
Mm.
And so I was always very like surprised and happy whenever Alan popped in, because he like continually came at it from a different angle that I was like, Alan's not going to be good. Which is probably like interesting to think about for anyone in terms of what you were just saying too, like how you cast a certain character in your mind, but then it's like every time he like outperformed and outshined and like truly in some ways was the behind the scenes hero of the story, like trying to work for lots of things, but would never be the person that's like getting the medal or getting like billed as that, but was kind of constantly working for both sides, Barbie and Ken, to try to be like, how can we create a more, not even just like a more livable experience for everyone. And like oftentimes those people are in the middle and get forgotten because they don't fit into one of the bigger chunks of the Venn diagram, you know?
Yeah, and even like when all of the Barbies go and they like reinstate the Supreme Court and like, you know, pass or don't pass all those laws or whatever that Ken was gonna pass, Alan's there in a pink jumpsuit like everyone else. And they're all like, yay, women got the power back. And he's standing there and he goes, I'm so happy. And it's like, yeah, you are happy, but also like that didn't really help you.
Yeah.
Like I think sometimes, I don't know, I feel bad like I'm consistently like speaking for the LGBTQ community, which I can't do and that wouldn't be fair of me to do, but it just, seeing it the second time, every time he said and Alan, or honestly anytime he spoke, it just like hurt, because I was like, this movie is still living in a binary that so many people don't fit in.
Yeah.
So I was just like processing that.
Yeah. Yeah, overall, I mean, I thought it was a good movie. I thought that, and actually conversations like this I find to be helpful because you can create a greater meaning out of it. Like as much as I watched it, I'm like, I didn't cry and it wasn't like life-changing. And again, maybe it wasn't fully for me, but I did think it was a good movie. And I think I think actually watching any movie with some lens for finding a social commentary in it is like not a bad thing. And that's what I have appreciated about anyone I've had the conversation with about it. Like my wife and I have talked a little bit about it since, and we've talked about it now both here and a little bit off, and like other people, Sadie and I have talked about it. And so I think like there is a benefit of like, it's a conversation catalyzer, which I think is the best part about it for me, is like people are having conversations about gender, about roles, about norms that maybe wouldn't. Like I was hanging out with a chunk of Annie's family that's much more on the conservative side and believes in more traditional biblical roles and all sorts of things, but it all seen the Barbie movie. And so it gave us a unified like piece of media to start from that was pretty objective. Like you could subjectively like be like, this meant this or that meant that, but like we were all looking at the same thing. And it gave us, from our different vantage points, a really interesting path to have a conversation maybe we wouldn't have had before. So I did really appreciate that, because with that side of conversation, I'm oftentimes looking for a way to like share that I'm not some like kooky liberal to them or some heretic Christian. And so it was like, this is a really interesting opportunity I'm presented to use this thing that they all really liked, and maybe didn't see it pushing this narrative that I saw it, but at least we can meet in the middle. So I found it valuable in that regard.
I dig that. And I feel like I've seen that to be true somewhat too. Like there are people who maybe I expected to not enjoy it or to say like that was too liberal or whatever, who ended up naming, especially women who I've talked to who maybe also lean more conservatively, were like, this movie named my experience
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And that's not inherently like liberal to say, you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Which I think is important.
Mm.
I felt like I was going to say something else. Oh, but I will say I did see a lot of people from like my old church post and share articles about how this is like the enemy of, you know, biblical Christianity.
Naturally.
And I was like, all right. And then this one woman who's awesome, she is in the PCA, and she wrote an article that was just like things I liked in the Barbie movie. And she was like, I know it's not perfect, but I just feel like it's getting a lot of hate, and I think that we can like find some common ground and find some beauty. And the comments just, it was a very like,
Was it hateful comments or positive?
Hateful comment. Okay. It was like, I would never watch this. I would never let my daughter watch this. This is why we have such like a male hating society. And I think that's one thing, and maybe you can speak on this as a male, but I heard some people say like, I don't think the Barbie movie is anti-man, because when things got switched and Ken like had all this power, he had patriarchy, he had everything he wanted, he also still wasn't happy. And so the point is like, they were saying like there is like a sympathetic lens towards Ken in a sense of like, okay, like even when men like have more power, have all they want, like that doesn't necessarily make them happy and fulfill them.
Yeah, I mean, I think people should watch things that make them uncomfortable. So
Right.
I think like if it was anti-man, there's probably the reason it makes you uncomfortable is because men hold nearly all of the power, and you should be made a little bit uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But I also equate it to like white people being like, well, we don't want to give people of color reparations because if we do too much, then they'll take over and we'll be enslaved. And it's like, that's, you're like blowing things like way out of proportion, and like equality should be what we're fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
And being uncomfortable yourself should be a natural part of the learning process.
Mm-hmm.
And so like for me watching it, I didn't think it was anti-men, but I thought it was a really interesting look at putting men in shoes as a character that they're almost never in. And also like, from you said this earlier, like the Supreme Court being all women, right?
Yeah.
Like men don't realize how problematic something like that is when it's all men. But I bet you a lot of men were like, oh, I'd never live in a world that was all women because X, Y, and Z would happen, right? They'd regulate my body and they'd tell me all these things, right? And it's like, oh.
They'd all get their periods and make crazy.
Sure, right? So I think from that regard, like we oftentimes, when it's so normal to us, we look around and like and I can live in a really male dominant, and I do, society. And I can go through it with a lot of ease without ever challenging it because it's comfortable to me. And so to watch that and see like all women in all of these roles that oftentimes are men, if that makes me uncomfortable, a great question is like, why does that make me uncomfortable? And when it's reversed to what it normally is of all men, does that make other people uncomfortable? And why? And I think at its end, it should make us all more aware people, not just like frustrated people, but maybe also frustrated people that become more aware. But I think oftentimes we avoid things that just make us uncomfortable because they make us uncomfortable.
Yeah, I remember I was in like 6th grade. I was like pretty young, but my friend and I went and saw the movie Selma, which was about Martin Luther King Jr. And I remember afterward, we watched it, and afterward I told my dad, I was like, we were the only white people in the theater. And my dad said, and how did that make you feel? And he was like, you've probably never had that feeling. And there are people who experience exactly what you experienced. Like a lot of the people in that theater have experienced what you felt that day all the time.
Yeah.
And it was something, I mean, and I was little, but that like really, I was kind of shook because I was like, oh yeah, it was a little uncomfortable. Like it wasn't like, oh, I can't be here. But it's weird when you're the only one different.
Yeah. You like realize your otherness, right? When you are the minority in the room. And I think for me, I don't often experience otherness, or I mean, I do from time to time, and it makes me uncomfortable when I am, but it's like in my station in life and my place, like I don't often have to, I can avoid it if I want to. And I think being forced to, or like challenged by choice, doing that will only make you a more rounded human being, because so many other people don't get the choice and experience it on a regular basis, otherness.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I'll say is like the reverse of that, I think is true, in which the Barbie movie showed me, and I think showed a lot of women, how comfortable we get in our otherness and in our like being seen as inferior. Like, but when you see it happen to a man, you're like, well, that's not okay.
Yeah.
You know, like when you see the way like Ken is treated, you're like, oh my gosh, like that is wild. And then at the end of the Barbie movie, they're like, don't worry, now like the Kens have as many jobs and rights as like women do in our current society. And you're kind of like, oh, that sucks for them. But in a day-to-day life, we just like kind
Yeah.
of think that's normal. So I think sometimes we need to be uncomfortable, but also sometimes we need like uncomfortable in the fact that we maybe have a lot of privilege, but also sometimes I think the Barbie movie flipped it in a way that showed women like, oh, we've accepted a lot that like if that was done to a man, we'd be like, well, that can't happen.
Yeah.
Which is kind of wild.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
wild. What was your favorite moment or quote from the movie?
Ooh, it's a great question. Um, honestly, kind of like what I started with, but the scene when Ken is like being like, I don't know who I am apart from
Mm-hmm.
like just being the person that compliments you.
Yeah.
But I also did really like. Ooh, I actually different answer.
Yeah.
I feel like I keep talking about periods on this episode, and I apologize.
It's only
But
twice.
I know,
But it shows how normative the male society is and how otherness
Right.
you feel, but just by talking about it twice.
Okay. But at the end, at the first time I saw it, the end when she's like, I'm here to see my gynecologist, and she like becomes human, I was like, that's kind of a stupid ending. And then I saw it the second time and I was like, dude, that is like we've walked through what it means to be a woman in society, and we haven't gotten to be like what it means to like be a woman in your body. And like you almost kind of feel sad for her, like you're like, oh, you don't even know. That was a really powerful moment of like, we've talked through how hard it is to be a woman, and we haven't even gotten to anything related to women's bodies.
Yeah.
Until that moment. And I don't know, I actually ended up finding that really powerful. How about you?
Way less.
It's okay.
Way less meaningful. When Ken yells sublime, I like laughed out loud in the theater. I thought it was really, really funny. Like when he just slips behind the door. I can't even remember what they're talking about. He's just like, sublime! And then pops back out. I was like,
the saloon doors.
Yeah, it was killed me. It was pretty
that.
funny.
Do you want to move on to
Yeah.
email corner, or do you want to do that next episode?
Let's do email corner. Do you have any?
Any emails?
Yeah.
I don't.
Okay. Let me
email corner. I'm back.
You're back. Let me see if I can scroll through here. So a woman named Ashley has she's actually the one with the Coke versus Pepsi stuff that was messaging us.
Okay. Can I see who it is?
Oh, you might. I don't know. Do you know this person?
Oh, her and I've been messaging.
Yeah,
she's
great.
cool. Yeah.
It'd be really weird if you said she wasn't.
She sucks. I'm kidding.
But she sent us a DM on the deconstruction one. I think we both ghosted her.
Oh. Her and I talk on my own Instagram
great.
now.
So, but and maybe you already asked this, but I just thought it was an interesting one to say. She said also making a drinking game out of how many times I say compelling would get someone sloshed during the show.
That's really funny.
Let me see if I can find this. Great pre-production on my side would have been pulling this up before we got here.
Well, the only reason I asked is because you said you wanted to talk about that. It's on the Coke and Pepsi thing.
I know I did, and then I dove in. Just so much in here. So someone, or she had mentioned about, and maybe you have these, but in terms of recovery from kind of the hyper evangelical, maybe more culty Christianity type things, things that have been helpful as far as recovery and transitioning out of that. She was just like, what are things, resources, books, podcasts that have helped you kind of transition out of what was a pretty oppressive religious culture and climate? What are some things that helped you transition out of that? One thing I recommended, I have a friend who did a podcast that was called Simple Mental Health. His name's Jeff Allen. And it wasn't a necessarily religious based one, but it was very mental health based, which was a part of her conversation of kind of regaining mental health as you get out of that. And so I thought that was a really helpful one that I could recommend. But for you, do you have any recommendations as resources for someone transitioning out of and trying to kind of regain some level of physical, mental, spiritual health on the other side of that?
That's a great question. The first thing that came to my mind is I
will say, as much as, and it's all recounted on here, but when I took like a pretty full, like hard stop break,
Mm-hmm.
that was definitely almost like a palate cleanser and like a reboot, because it is hard to like leave something that oppressive and then move right into like progressive Christianity because you're still working through all your triggers. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's just one thing I thought of. That's maybe kind of a really big advice, but it's something that I thought of. But also, I think for me, when I was leaving and looking for things to like heal, I mean, I've said this before, but the podcast Dirty Rotten Church Kids was like
Mm-hmm.
a really big part of my story, in that to me it named, actually this goes back to the Barbie movie, because one thing that America Ferrera says is, she's like, the way to like heal is to name the cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, at least for me, the Dirty Rotten Church Kids did that really well. And they were just like, it's kind of wild that they tell us this and this. And I was like, that is wild.
Yeah, you don't feel alone, right? Did you hear that?
Yeah, it was really helpful. And also I think a big thing that's been to me is just like re-entering it to my body, because I think sometimes when you're in that space, you constantly have to be like, I feel this way about this, but that's sinful. And so you disconnect yourself from yourself.
Okay.
And so I read the book The Wisdom of Your Body by Hilary McBride, and she writes specifically through a deconstruction lens. And it was very, very good. I really liked it. And also I talked about this on our New Age episode, but like the first time I did Reiki, like the energy healing, it was like pretty weird and I didn't really vibe with it. But I ended up doing it again a few more times with a different person. And I would say you don't have to agree with this, but it helped me kind of reconnect to my body, and just the way that it like the process calls you into connection with like your 7 chakras, like don't laugh at me, like the 7 parts of yourself. And that helped me in my embodiment journey.
Yeah. I would say, just as a quick aside, if you don't already subscribe to the YouTube, you should, just for the sake of watching my face as you're talking about this Reiki healing. So I think that's great. So hopefully that's helpful. And I think
Yeah.
like one thing I would say really quickly in terms of like email corner is sometimes just with, I mean, you being back in school and like church stuff, like going full, like
Yes.
oftentimes I don't dive into our TikTok or Instagram or email very often.
Mhm.
And so I would say, just as an aside, like if you want to DM me, it's just my first name, Danny_Liebarger.
Yeah.
If you have any like emails for us, and I think if you're willing, you could give yours out as well or whatever.
Yeah, Emily_Zell. That honestly, I'll probably respond quicker, because sometimes I'll see the Deconstruction Zone thing, but sometimes I just want the red one to go away, and then I open it and go away,
Yeah.
which is not the best.
Well, I'll say actually, I went back to go find one and I clicked in it and I must have deleted it, or it was in like ours get filtered a lot on the Deconstruction Zone,
that's
and so
true.
I miss a lot of them, and so my personal one doesn't get filtered. So I would just say, if you want to reach out, like those are probably 2 easier ways, but you can
Yes.
still use our Instagram,
Mhm.
TikTok if you can there as well, email, but
I would agree.
IG DMs.
My personal one does get filtered, like to
Okay.
like the requests part. Maybe it does for you
Okay.
too. And
I think
sometimes
mine
I
does
miss
too.
it. And so I remember I like spent a day responding to like 10 people who just were like, "Thank you for the pod," and I was like, "Oh my god, I'm sorry, I just saw this." But
That's
usually
great.
I'm getting better about that. So I would say your best bet is to message one of us directly.
Yeah, it's great.
Recommendations.
Yeah. Choo choo.
Choo choo.
Recommendation station.
Oh yeah, is that what we're calling it?
I don't know.
It's been so long.
I think we did
It's
one
been
time.
85 years
Was that a
from the
quote?
Titanic, I think.
Is that your recommendation?
No, that's one of my least favorite movies.
Really?
Yeah, we don't need to dive into
Jack,
that.
paint me like one of your women. Isn't that one of the lines from the movie?
It's just when she's like, "I'll never let go," and then she just. I was like, okay. I just finished this book today, so
Okay.
I'm really excited to talk about it. It's called The Humans by Matt Haig.
Okay.
It's a novel. I kind of randomly found it, but it's basically this alien who comes to Earth in like human form. Sound like the incarnation? Not really, but but basically it's just it's like through the alien's lens, and he's like talking about everything he's noticing about humanity, and he comes from this very like perfect world where there's, damn, maybe this is kind of spiritual, like there's like no pain or death or suffering, and everything
Yeah.
is like logical and based in math. And he basically is just like, there was something really, like, he'll just be like, there was something really comforting about talking to this dog because I knew he was loyal to me, even though he never talks back and doesn't know what I mean. But like, think like little things like that about human life that you just take for granted, being seen through like an alien lens and then seeing the beauty in it. I cherished it.
Okay.
I called it on Goodreads an existential balm because it's just like, oh yeah, this is what's like beautiful about life. I
Yeah.
recommend it.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Mine is not a book, though. Do you have that on audiobook or did you read it?
I listened to it.
I might have to give it a try. That sounds really interesting.
I thought I would be annoyed by the guy's voice because he had a British accent. Not that there's anything wrong with having a British accent, but sometimes I don't like to listen to it for like 9 hours in a row.
Yeah.
But I got really used to it and really enjoyed it.
Okay.
So yeah.
So my recommendation, one of my favorite stand-up comedians, Dan Cummins, just released on YouTube his stand-up special. So it's free, and it's called Trying to Get Better. I saw it live when he came to St. Louis with my twin brother. Met him and his wife backstage, which was a lot of fun. But I rewatched it, and it was like better. Even better like watching it. And sometimes I do think stand-up comedy is better watched than like the experience live is great, but I think you catch more of the jokes and the timing because what they put together for the special just works, and the laughs help get you to laugh, all those things. But rewatching it is great, and it's pretty big politically. It's a pretty big political commentary. The guy's not super religious, but he's like someone's like, oh, I'm not on the left and I'm not on the right. I'm kind of in this weird like middle ground. And it's just, I really appreciate his comedy as a whole.
Okay.
His podcast is like one of the ones I religiously listen to, and like one of the few still. But the special was really, really good, and I liked it. So Trying to Get Better, Dan Cummins. It's free on YouTube, at least for now. So you can go watch it.
That's great. Okay. I'm going to try to look that up. I don't think I've listened to any of Dan Cummins.
Yeah, I think he's not like for everybody. And so
Okay.
like a lot of people would be like either it's too profane or like he's just like not my style. He's pretty aggressive. But I find him to be like very, very funny, and someone that is just like he's a Northwestern person. He's from Idaho.
Okay.
Grew up in like a pretty conservative area, but has like slowly become more moderate to progressive.
Yeah.
And I think I in some ways like jive with that like trajectory of life.
Yeah.
And so like I resonate with him in that. And he's not that much older than I am, and so I find him to be interesting in that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Those are two pretty different recommendations
They are.
for every kind of listener out there.
I think so. Well, cool.
Well, Danny, it's been great to be back in the zone.
In the zone. And you know what they say?
Comfort is a slow death.
Emily apparently has not been here since the set has been changed. And that was like the first thing she noticed when she walked in.
I go, that's intense. It's really cute. It's just like,
I love
damn.
it. It's one of my favorite parts of the new set. So Dustin, you've done great.
No, I'm not saying anything bad about it. I was just like, whew.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, thank you guys for listening. I did not leave the podcast and embrace the journey.
Look at that, a few weeks off and we're still snapping on time together.
We're killing it.
Good.